I'm Aryeh Shorts alongside Rachel Galligan, and welcome to the Winsidr Show, where it's all about the W. Liberty control and take game 2 to tie the series up 1-1. We now head to Minnesota for ever important game 3 and 4. So let's dive right in. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community, patreon.com/Winsidr. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W. And don't forget to see our amazing staff's written content over at winsidr.com. That's winsidr.com. Welcome back to the show. Excited to be here with my favorite co-host, Rachel Galligan. Before we dive into game 2, game 1, and what we're expecting for games 3 and 4, just want to remind everyone we're doing a giveaway. We're partnering with Homage, giving away a WNBA team hoodie and a t-shirt of your choosing. All you have to do is email aryeh@winsidr.com and share with us your favorite WNBA memory. That's Aryeh, ARYEH, @winsidr.com. Okay, Rachel, let's dive in. Where do you want to start? Because we just finished our Bleacher Report live stream. In preparation for that, it felt like we were doing a podcast just by talking to each other about our feelings on this episode, on our feelings on the series. Where is your head at? Because there's so many different ways. I feel like you've been avoiding the question. Where is your head at when it comes to this series? Call her out.
I don't know. I mean, I guess it's the same thing I told you this morning when you texted me. How we feeling? I'm feeling that what was supposed to happen happened. I mean, we definitely. I thought it would be a little flip flopped. I definitely expect this to be 1-1 after the first 2 games headed back to Minnesota. Now, the way it happened, to have Minnesota win game 1 in the fashion in which they did, was impressive, to say the least. Understatement of the year. And the meltdown that the Liberty had in that fourth quarter, second half, whatever you want to call it, missed opportunity, big time. I mean, you make a free throw and this is 2-0. I mean, you can't think that way, right? So, the Liberty lose game 1. They did exactly what they needed to do in terms of responding in game 2, in my opinion. And I think you had some players that stepped up that, from a confidence perspective, I think needed to happen for just, the totality of this team. Benijah Laney Hamilton played extremely well, knocking down 4 threes, was efficient, was kind of that X factor in that game. And you had 4 players in double figures. And I said on the Bleacher Report show, when you've got the New York Liberty as a 4-headed monster and not a 3-headed monster, but we also know this could be a 5-headed monster, but with all the different offensive weapons that you've seen on this team, it was good to see Laney Hamilton get going the way that she got going. I think the bigger storyline of this series so far, because I think, again, we both agree this is about what we expected. I have this thing going to 5. You have it going to 4. But I'm not surprised in terms of the series 1-1. What I am surprised with is the pattern of how these games have been going. The way the Liberty are coming out so hot in that first quarter. And basically the Lynx are coming out and having to spend the rest of the game digging themselves out of a hole. And I broke down some numbers earlier today just because, again, they kind of mirrored one another. The Liberty are averaging 31.5 points per game in the first quarter. The Lynx are averaging 20. So just off the bat, 10 minutes into the game, the Lynx are down 11 on average and having to spend the next 3 quarters digging themselves out of it. Now, so far, the Lynx are winning the next 3 quarters. Lynx are averaging 17.5 points per game in the second quarter, while the Liberty are averaging just 15. So that's a massive, that's cut in half from what they're coming out of the gate. And again, is part of that just being in New York, being in Barclays Center, the energy, the emotion, the fan base, just coming out, like just knocking down every shot and playing with this intense sense of urgency. I think we've seen out of Liberty in that first quarter, and then it really starts to drop off, and they kind of come back down to earth, some would say. So that average is cut in half into the second quarter. The third quarter, this is where. And I think a lot of people who have covered the Liberty this season have talked about this team coming out of halftime. They've struggled, only averaging 14 points per game in the third quarter. Meanwhile, the Lynx averaging 18.5 points per game so far in these 2 games. And then you get into the fourth quarter, Liberty are averaging 17.5, Lynx are averaging 18. So relatively even though, you take out game 1, that feels like the Liberty hardly scored. But we got to remember that those final 10 minutes did kind of bleed over into overtime. And so, for Minnesota to finish those 10 minutes of game one, 29-11, makes that number feel a little bit more skewed. But that to me is the biggest storyline out of this series so far, is just what is it about the start? And it's less about New York, in my opinion, because I attribute it to just coming out. They're at home, the momentum. But what is it about the Minnesota Lynx coming out and digging themselves a hole and defensively not being able to slow them down? We have not seen the Minnesota Lynx play their best basketball in this series so far. And more than anything, we haven't seen them defend, control the paint, the glass, the way we're used to this team being. And it's interesting, right? Because like headed into Sunday, Minnesota's led this series 4-1. Well, now it's 4-2. It's like the Lynx have their number on paper, but then when you watch the product and you see, especially that first quarter, you can't help but sit here and think, I mean, the Liberty have all the tools to be the much better team. My biggest question now, and again, probably recency bias, but just what is it about the start of this Minnesota Lynx team, and what is it that makes them struggle so much defensively, and they've not been able to play their best basketball? That was
Yeah,
a
I mean,
lot. Sorry.
I think we gotta look back and we gotta check like what happened during those regular season games in terms of what the first quarters were like, what the rest of the quarters were like. We didn't prep that. We should have. My bad.
I'm not
Listen,
even as concerned with that, right? Because there's so many factors that go into play when you're talking about 3-4 months ago. These being two games so close to one another, it's like, what is happening right now? I don't know. Sorry. Yeah,
yeah, no,
we just haven't seen Minnesota. They're like at 70% of what we know this team can be.
it looks like they're in a hangover from from the semifinals almost, because it was so much more physical, because it was so much, I don't want to say more intense, but maybe you're right. I think coming to Minnesota will obviously jolt them a little bit more. I'm completely with you. I think it's a purely defensive effort. I hate saying effort, but it's a defensive showing from Minnesota in the first quarter. Look, if you're letting up 30 plus in the first quarter, that's a huge issue unless you're keeping up with that. The whole point of what Minnesota does throughout the whole season, and they've had some rough starts to the season, is that your defense has been good enough in the first quarter where even if your offense, because sometimes their offense does take a little time to get going, but
Right.
typically the lead that you're trying to dig out of isn't that big. And so you're able to get out of it quicker, and then you're in a much different position. If Minnesota is able to get into a position where in the second quarter you're down 2, where in the second quarter you take a 4-point lead, that's a very different game than what we've been seeing, where Minnesota has to kind of keep rushing to keep up with New York, to keep up with New York. And that's been the story for me in 2 games, is Minnesota's been trying to keep up with New York, not in the same way that Vegas did, where it seemed impossible, where it seemed like we would need to see perfection from Vegas to contend with New York. In Minnesota, and that's the funny part, because we know New York's talented roster, right? And we know Minnesota's talented roster, but you look at these teams, and it should not be that Minnesota, on playing bad or not playing their best, can compete with them and make it a 2-point game in both games in the fourth quarter with limited time. I think Minnesota. All right, this is what I was talking about before, Rachel. It's so hard because if you view game one after the ridiculousness that happened, right? So if we just put ourselves in that window between game one and game two and talk about what we were thinking, right? As the time elapsed, we all said there's no way Liberty lose this game. You and I texting the morning of the game, I think you said you feel like it's going to be a 7-point game. I was like, I could feel like, anywhere from 3-point game to 11-point game. It ends up being what, like 14 points.
14.
So it was right around there. And it's hard because going into game two, it was do or die. What New York showed us in game two, in my opinion, was very similar to what we saw from Minnesota in game 5 against Connecticut. It was do or die. You had to put your best foot forward. You had to win that game, no question, no doubt, or your season is over. So I think if we're looking at it from that perspective, a 14-point loss when it's a do or die game against New York, when you had the opportunity to steal the game, you had the ball down 2 with a good amount of time left. Courtney Williams has the ball in her hand, stumbles on her foot, loses the ball. easy 3-point shot, dagger, game's over. Not game over, but you know what I mean. There was many moments of that where there just seemed to be a trip up. There wasn't that same smooth flow as they were making that comeback, which really seemed to hamper Minnesota's ability to make that late push. But you got to give credit to New York. It was, to me, it's New York's defense more than their offense.
For sure. Their length and their physicality. I mean, the length is a problem. And Cheryl Reeve has talking about that multiple times. I just want to piggyback off something you said. It's just, as I was watching the game yesterday on Sunday, I'm sitting here and I'm like, here we go again. Like, are we really going to do this again? And I'm like, there's no way. There's no way that this is going to happen again. And there's no way the New York Liberty are going to allow this to happen again. You know, if it did, and say, you know, the Lynx spent the majority of the game coming back and stealing it at the end, we'd be going absolutely nuts right now over just the complete meltdown of the Liberty. And honestly, most would probably feel like this thing was over. But yes,
Rachel, do Liberty even fly to Minnesota if they blow?
I would be very concerned about how you, but you know, to their credit, they responded. They didn't let it happen, you know. And I just was looking at this game, going, "There's just no way." I almost felt like I know this sounds really. I almost felt like I didn't need to watch it because I felt like this is exactly like after the first quarter, I'm like, the Liberty will they are going to respond, and they're going to respond defensively. And when you look at the numbers, you know, again, the New York Liberty beat Minnesota kind of at their own game. Did a great job, shot 48% from the floor, 46% from the 3-point line. I mean, I really think that Minnesota struggled to slow them down from the 3-point line. Out rebounded. This was huge. New York out rebounded Minnesota 34-27. But the biggest stat, in my opinion, were the second chance points. 10 New York Liberty second chance points off of those offensive rebounds. 10. That's a stat that, like, I've got to believe that Cheryl Reeve's just pissed off about. You know, and honestly, probably everybody on the Minnesota Lynx, who those are missed opportunities of just not getting beat on the offensive glass. That's something that this team takes a lot of pride in. And that's, you know, those are types of plays that you can't give up in the finals and expect to win a game. Liberty they won the free throw line battle. 11 of 14. The Lynx only got there 7 times. A lot of coaches, they're going to tell you shoot more free throws than the other team, or make more free throws than the other team attempts. You know, and so, you know, you could keep going down the line. You know, Minnesota's 20 turnovers, gave up 26 points off those turnovers. Very uncharacteristic by the Lynx. Points in the paint, Minnesota did win that, surprisingly, which is very interesting given the offensive rebounding stat. But the fast break points, and this was another stat that I thought, when the Liberty are able to get out in transition, play with pace in the open floor, penetrate into the paint and kick, and, you know, trailers are, you know, getting to their spots on the floor, they're tough to beat. And when you're turning the ball over at the rate the Lynx were in game 2, that's just going to create so many high percentage shots for the Liberty. And so, yes, you credit New York and how they responded. You credit New York and how, you know, they closed out that game. They knew Minnesota was going to make a run. This team wasn't going to just roll over and get beat by 25. At least, you know, I don't think anybody thought that. So they closed out the game. But, you know, again, I just think Minnesota coming out of that hole, digging yourself an 11-point hole to start the game, has got to be the focus when they're going back home to Target Center. How do we come out with more energy, more pace, and set the tone? We want to be the ones swinging first, not the ones taking the punches.
And how do you respond if in game 3, New York starts hot again? How do you correct your errors is going to be a key thing for me. Another key thing for me, look, Bridget, look, we're talking about Minnesota more because the way New York handled game 2, it brings us, and honestly, how game 1 was, it brings you to want to talk about Minnesota more, only in the sense of you saw, you know, Stewie do Stewie things, right? You saw Laney step up and do Laney things. The questions for New York for me are they going to continue to establish JJ in the paint?
Yeah.
And is Sabrina going to play solid shooting offense? And those, look, it's about defense. There's about a lot of, like, you have to play great ball, but playing against these teams, everyone's gonna be playing great ball. Can those are the X factors for me in New York.
And I want to make one more point just about how I'm feeling is, I know the Lynx have had the Liberty's number throughout the course of this season. It was 4-1 before Sunday, now 4-2. But when you watch this product on the floor these last couple games, it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel that way. I
No.
mean, let's be honest, New York should be up 2-0 right now. They should be
Yes.
up 2-0. They won game 2 handedly. They took care of business. You know, they were by far the better team on the floor on Sunday. New York should have won game 1. We have yet to see this Minnesota Lynx team come out and play their brand of basketball on both ends of the floor. And I think the most glaring thing is just defensively. You know, they've not been able to slow the Liberty down in ways in which, you know, they need to, and in the ways in which they've been able to earlier on in the season. And so that's the part for me that I'm so confused with, is you look at how Minnesota, they know how to beat the Liberty, but we just haven't seen them play to what they're capable of playing these last 2 games whatsoever, in my opinion.
No, I agree with you in certain aspects. The aspect I disagree with is, and we've talked about this in the Bleacher Report. If we break it down per quarter, Minnesota was able defensively. Like if we look at New York, look, if we're talking about the New York Liberty's offense, to hold them to an average of 15 points per game in the second quarter, that's good defensively for Minnesota. If in the third quarter you're holding New York to 14 points, that's good. 17 and a half. Like if you're holding New York under 20 in clearly under 20, but like 15, 14, and 17 and a half, clearly under 20 for 3 of the quarters. To me, it's not Minnesota has not been able to stop New York. And I know what you mean by that. And I'm not trying to like penny pick or whatever. But for me, like it's more so it's that first quarter and it's offensively Minnesota. New York's also holding Minnesota under 20 in essentially every single quarter. You got 20 per game in the first,
Yep.
17 and a half, 18 and a half, and 18. To me, it's New York has been able to disrupt Minnesota's offense just enough where you have these players who are key aspects of their offense not producing in the ways that they need them and not producing in the ways that they've grown accustomed to. If I'm talking about Bridget Carlton struggling from shooting her 3, I'm talking about Chechi Zandalicini struggling with a lot of turnovers, just not finding a flow in this game. And she's a player who can bring a lot of importance to this team. And like that's what it is to me. It's about the depth for Minnesota. We know Maisha Hines-Allen needs to score, 2, 4 points a game. Zandy needs to score like 3 to 6 points a game.
Bridget Carlton needs to meet her average, you know?
Bridget Carlton needs to meet her average or rise to the occasion. And it's not, and look, I'm not saying this to take away from what New York has done. What New York has done is get Minnesota in similar ways to what Minnesota has done throughout the season, get offenses just a split second off of their rhythm. I think they've done a really good job of that. Passes are a little bit to the side, a little bit low, a little bit high, not where you want it. And the pass is coming a split second later, a split second early. That said, there's been many looks that Minnesota has had, and they're not shooting the ball well from 3. If you're shooting 6 for 20, just 30% from 3 for Minnesota, you need to be shooting a little bit better than that. Once Nafisa, if you could get Nafisa involved a little bit more, let her shoot a few threes. She hasn't hit a 3 yet in these finals. Well, you need to, if you're Minnesota, feed your star and get your good players going. That's
I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to double down again. Like you're putting so much pressure on your offense. If you're the Minnesota Lynx, to think that you're just going to try to just run up and down and outscore the Liberty are the better offensive team. I mean, they were second in the league in terms of offensive production. Minnesota Lynx were 6th. I mean, now granted, there's about a 4-point differential between those two, but you're putting so much pressure to try to keep up with Jonquel Jones, Fibich, Sabrina, Brianna Stewart, all of the offensive weapons that the Liberty have. I mean, if this just becomes a shootout, the Liberty are going to win this, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. That's why, like, defensively, the Lynx have got to be better defensively. They've got to be able to be better out of the gate and be able to sustain that for 40 minutes. I just want to push back on the defense.
No. First of all, I mean, you're wrong, but I agree. I agree. No, so here's the thing. And here's the thing, how it ties together. If you follow Cheryl Reeves' style of basketball and what the Lynx have done, their offense feeds and is energized by their defense. So much of it comes from the energy this team gets from when a player makes a good play. When Alana Smith gets a defensive rebound and pushes it up court. When Fee's running full speed up court. When you get transition. And so I agree with you. I don't think we're saying different things, right? I think what we're saying is Minnesota needs to get the ball into offensively and to do the things that they're successful at. To do that, they need to stop New York and they need to get the ball moving and get New York on their heels. Once you get New York on your heels, look, these teams, in my opinion at least, a lot of the ways you disrupt them are similar. You press them for a majority of the court. You get in their face. You don't let their offense walk up the court and engage on your defense. You make the defense engage the offense. And that starts to throw motions off. It starts to throw the rhythm off. And that's how you compete against these teams. And yes, New York has more potent scorers. New York has, bigger stars. Minnesota has the depth. If you're coming out of game 2, where Minnesota basically cleared the whole bench except Peely, and it's 5-5 bench scoring, that's a concern for Minnesota. I don't care that, you had Miller and Upopa only getting 2 minutes or 1 minute each, or Dork only 2 minutes. You have 9 minutes from Aisha, 8 from Zandy, 19 from Natisha. You need more than 5 points from those 3 players combined, because that's part of what your team is. You rely on the fact that you have depth to step up when a Bridget Carlton is only scoring 4 points below her season average or 2 points below. Somebody else picks that up. New York has been able to do that. Can Minnesota do it? Rachel, you want to say something? Then I want to ask you a question. Go.
No, I want to ask you a question. I want to
Oh,
ask
no.
about your predictions.
Oh, that's
Is
what I
that
was
where
going
you
to
were
say.
going with it?
That's where, Rachel, great minds think alike, even though we always disagree.
Wednesday, October 16th. So we got a couple, tomorrow by the time probably this comes out, New York Liberty at the Minnesota Lynx. So up in Target Center. I'll let you go first. Since you're from there, let me just be the gentlewoman and let you go first.
Oh, Minnesota's taking it.
Okay.
I think Minnesota wins by 4.
Ooh,
I think
we're going numbers. Okay.
To me, it feels like one of those games that it's going to be like a 1.5 possession game almost, right? And then at the end, maybe it extends to a 6-7. But I think for at the moment, because that's why, like, you look at the second game, it was a 14-point game, but really we know it was closer than that. New York extended it. In my mind, it was more so a 10-point game, right? When it got to the point where Minnesota throws in the towel and says, we're resting,
I mean,
fine.
it was a one possession game, like in the fourth quarter. So
with like 3 minutes left or something
right.
like that. So that, or maybe even less. That's how I view that. I think it will be a 1-2 possession game. Minnesota takes it. I still think it's, we're going to get a huge message. There's no longer this in games 1 and 2, right? There was this different styles of motivation. I don't think we're at a point where either team is more motivated than the other anymore, right? This isn't a do or die game for either team. So I think we see a little bit less of I need to do this now. I got Minnesota winning by anywhere from 4-7. Rachel, what about you?
I guess I think the Minnesota Lynx are kind of pissed. I think they're pissed that they have not played up to their own expectations of themselves. And I think being able to go back home and finally, you just weathered this crazy storm up in New York for the last 2 games, and being able to go back home in front of your friends and your friends in that environment and have that type of energy around you, I think is exactly what this team needs right now. They've been very good at home. Everybody knows that. And so I'm going to have the Lynx taking this game too. I do think it could go either way for sure, but I'm going to take Minnesota. And I agree. I think it's going to come down to the wire. I think it'll end up being, honestly, I'm hoping that, I don't know. Let me think about this for a second. You know what? I'm going to go a little bit more than that. I'm going to say that the Minnesota Lynx are going to win this by about 6. They're going to hit that next gear. They're going to be a lot better defensively. It's still going to be a great game, but they're going to be able to secure this down the stretch in regulation, win by 6.
I'm not going to let you go for our normal, typical question to end every episode,
I have a
because
good answer this time.
it better be the answer I think it is, Rachel.
One of the greatest of all time, Simone Augustus, was just enshrined into the Naismith Memorial Hall of Fame. I think we've got to give Augustus her flowers. I know that's going to make you very happy. I was prepared this time. Normally I'm not prepared. And the one time I'm prepared, you're going to take it from me. So,
well, I was going to take it because I was worried you weren't going to do it.
I did it.
No, respect. Yeah, I got to give props to Augustus. If you haven't already, if you're a basketball fan, because you're listening to this pod, make sure you go listen to the poem she wrote about basketball in her opening address, or part of her speech for the Hall of Fame. It's greatness personified. She is greatness personified. She's the GOAT for today's episode.